The legal cannabis industry has unlocked generational wealth opportunities across the country. But the industry's regulatory complexities, constant state of change, and speed of evolution drive confusion for entrepreneurs and investors alike. On this podcast, we'll interview the industry leaders who are shaping the future of the legal cannabis industry to help our listeners understand these idiosyncrasies. This is Cannabis Unlocked, hosted by Key Investment Partners. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Cannabis Unlocked. I'm your host today, Jordan Youkilis, one of the founding partners of Key Investment Partners. And today I'm really honored to be joined by Alvaro Torres, the co-founder and CEO of Khiron Life Sciences. Alvaro, how are you today?
Good, Jordan. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Good afternoon.
Absolutely. Good afternoon to you as well. Excited to be chatting to you while I'm in Denver and you're in Bogota. And, Colombia is one of my favorite countries I've been to. So would love to kick things off, learn a little bit more about your background and your history, and we can take the conversation from there.
Sure. Well, so Jordan, I am Colombian American. I was born in the United States many years ago. I want to say how many. And then been living all my life here in Colombia. My background is on engineering. I actually got my industrial engineering degree in RPI, upstate New York, my first master's with an MBA in Georgetown University. All my life, I've been working in Latin America in infrastructure and real estate, managing companies from construction, pipelines, whatever you name it. And about 5 years ago, the Colombian government legalized medical cannabis, and I saw that as an opportunity to really create an impactful business that's going to improve the quality of life of patients. I mean, we live in a region where opiates are also a crisis, just like the United States, except we have to import them and it's very expensive for the health system. So what if we create a company that's not just interested in exporting cheap cannabis to the rest of the world like we do with coffee, or bananas or all these commodities, but what if we actually build a company that's focused on building a brand, creating a relationship with consumers, with patients, and be the dominant player in that B2C aspect of the business? And that's actually why I named the company Khiron. Khiron in Greek mythology is the centaur that taught Hercules medicine, patron saint of pharmacies, because what we are trying to do is to provide access to medical cannabis in this region, in Latin America, we're 720 million people. And then how can we take the expertise that we have and move it to Europe, which is much even bigger market. And that was the idea 5 years ago. We started sales of medical cannabis almost 2 years ago. And today, we are the top selling brand in Latin America. Absolutely. One of the top selling brands of CBD flower in Germany and the top selling brand of medical cannabis in the UK. So, wow. It's been quite a trip. We still have a long way to go, very big markets. But that's what the company is all about. How do we improve the quality of life of people? And if you do that well with using medical cannabis, that's a sustainable business. And that's what we're all about.
That's fantastic. And congrats on having the top selling brand in all those diverse geographies. That's really
thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
And I'm curious, are you selling exclusively flower today or also other product categories and SKUs?
Well, in Latin America, Jordan, the regulations of the countries that we're working on, which is Colombia, Peru, Brazil, and very soon Mexico, it's all extract-based tinctures. Let's call it sublingual oils, which we produce in Colombia at a very low cost, of course. We sell for a very high 90% gross margins. And in Europe, right now, our business is mostly flower-based of medical cannabis, high THC and CBD, which we don't actually produce. We actually partner with third-party manufacturers within Europe so that we can have the agility to react to the market. But we also make tremendous gross margins out of it. And I think our expertise overall is really about how do we convince doctors to prescribe medical cannabis.
That makes total sense. And so how have you found ways to interact with doctors in these countries and help them understand the efficacy for patients?
Well, it's certainly not been easy because, doctors and medical practitioners believe in evidence a lot. And sadly, there's not enough evidence out there to, let's call it, compete with established pharmaceutical products. But what we decided to do about 3 years ago, it's how do you convince doctors, create evidence so that that evidence continues to drive doctor prescriptions. And we decided in a market like Colombia, where there was nothing like this before, that we're gonna create our own clinic network so that we can see patients, educate doctors, generate data, create evidence, and that starts becoming its own ecosystem of daily evidence. And that evidence that we produce on a daily basis helps doctors understand better medical cannabis, breaks the barriers of the myths of medical cannabis, and then take that education, that platform, and all that evidence and take it to other countries like Peru, Brazil, UK, and Germany, with very strong evidence on why cannabis works. I mean, today when we started, Jordan, we started with one patient, right? So you're betting your company and your success on that patient's ability to get better. But today we've seen more than 30,000 patients. Mm-hmm. And the amount of data you can imagine that we collect on the benefits of cannabis, that's transnational. And every day today, like we sell so many products, we have so much evidence that every week we collect it and we showcase it to the doctors all across the globe. And that's what keeps driving the prescription growth. And it's all about evidence, whether it's empirical or it's phase 1, phase 2. Right now, I think it's really more about showing the doctors that this works. And you collect the data in a very scientific manner. You start making publications like we did last week in Frontiers, one of these very renowned magazines, online publications. And that starts driving doctor prescriptions. But it started with one patient.
Wow. I mean, I guess that's how you have to start, right?
Yeah.
There's some like Chinese proverb, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step.
Exactly.
And so you talk about the cost competitiveness of Colombia, and that's certainly within key where we're predominantly focused on North American opportunities today. That's certainly been one of the risks we've identified for cultivations in North America, where once international commerce opens up, it's very likely a lot of the supply will shift to countries like Colombia and Peru, closer to the equator, where cost of labor is also less expensive. So I'd be curious to get your thoughts on how your supply costs compare to North American countries today and how you envision that supply chain developing over time.
Well, of course, being in Colombia next to Ecuador, as you say, gives us tremendous advantages. Cost of labor, cost of land, and also very importantly, for cannabis, the cost of electricity and water and utilities, which are very big part of this, of the cost structure of a product like this. So we do have the ability to enjoy that economic advantage versus trying to import something from the United States into these countries. And I think that helps us to be able to have tremendous gross margins, even with Colombia, when we go to Mexico, when we go to Peru, when we go to Brazil, and maybe one day even in North America. The other part of that equation, however, of course, is about quality, right? And it's not always the case that you can do very cheap cannabis with very high quality, which means consistency and all these standards. But I think a country like Colombia can certainly offer that. Mm-hmm. And once Mexico allows for cultivation and Brazil, the same thing will apply. For me, cultivation has always sort of been part of what we need to do to get our business going. But what really matters to us is how do we get that patient to take it? And how do we convince insurance companies and governments to cover it? Mm-hmm. Right now in Colombia, because of the work that Khiron does, we got the government of Colombia to cover medical cannabis for any patient. And so the cost advantage we're able to do in Colombia, it's right now mainly for our own benefit. Mm-hmm. But certainly Colombia will be an international player in the export of cannabis. What we want to do is export the know-how of how to prescribe it, and of course, take advantage of these low-cost jurisdictions so that we can make, tremendous gross profits.
That makes sense. And on the insurance front, that's certainly an issue that comes up in the US all the time too. Mm-hmm. And, I think part of the reason we haven't made more progress on the regulatory front is that, a lot of the pharmaceutical players have historically lobbied against cannabis legalization because of just that concern. And so I'm curious if you're seeing any forward progress on that front where insurance companies have started to accept cannabis in any of the countries in which you're operating.
Well, in our target markets, Germany already has insurance for medical cannabis. One of the reasons why when you talk about medical cannabis, price compression is not as important because it's covered by the government. Mm-hmm. And this is very big because when you're trying to think about competition with the black market or competition with adult use, if it's free, that makes a big difference. When we start in Colombia, we are unfortunately in countries where patients don't have a big monthly expenditure capacity, right? So it's always been important for us to say, how do we provide access? The real competition, Jordan, is not cannabis or cheap cannabis. The competition is free opiates. Mm-hmm. Because if you are a poor woman of 86 years old, and you're taking opiate medication or buprenorphine patches, which are covered by the system, yes, you get addicted. Yes, you have liver failure. All these things happen, but you make $500 a month. You don't need to spend more than $10 a month on that medication. Yeah. So for since I started the company, the obsession in our mind has been one day Latin America will cover medical cannabis because not only is it better for your health, but it's much cheaper than importing all this poison that we import mostly from the United States and Europe. And it takes data, as you said with the Chinese, the 1,000 league and the 1,000-mile journey. It starts with this data, which you start collecting. And then we started showing it to the government of Colombia. We said, guys, we're in a country where people are living longer, the cost of healthcare is rising, and the income for covering medications is reducing every year. But here it is, after 1 year of tests and trials, that we can save you 30% of your annual cost of medication. And that's how we got the government of Colombia to cover medical cannabis. Today, Jordan, in Colombia alone, 85% of our patients get it from medical insurance, and they have to pay $2 of copayment.
That's fantastic.
Now, this is a long trip because I've been doing this for 5 years, but imagine a future very soon where we can take all of this information, all this data that we collect, that we do this very uniquely because nobody does it, and we take it to Mexico, 120 million people, to Brazil, 250 million people, and you convince all these governments that the enemy is something else, that we can save money for these governments who need to spend this money on something else instead of just buying medication that's just getting people sicker. So the Holy Grail for us has always been about how we use this data of collecting and improving the quality of life of patients so we can convince governments that this is going to happen. Now, the even bigger Holy Grail is that we will take this data one day and we will show it to the NHS in UK. Mm-hmm. And imagine what that means when you're talking about a market like the United Kingdom, where patients can now eventually convince the National Health Services to cover this medication instead of covering opiates. And that, I think, is what's going to make medical cannabis, not a fad, not a trend, but a real medication. It takes data, it takes time, but we're already doing it in Colombia, we're already doing it in Germany. This is going to be a matter of time, but I can tell you that whoever's doing it first, like we do, is going to enjoy a very significant market share. Yeah, we probably own more than 90% of the Colombian market right now. So.
Wow, that's incredible market share.
Yeah. It is a 50 million people country, so we're not talking small potatoes here.
Yeah. And have you seen any movements on any of the countries in which you're operating today towards legal adult use?
Well, in Latin America, I would say that Mexico is probably the country that's most advanced in that thinking. They've been passing regulations. There's a lot of conversations in the Senate. I think Mexico is probably the only country right now that's seriously contemplating it. I guess because it's neighbor to the United States and things like that, which of course would be a tremendous opportunity for the cannabis industry because we are really just looking for how do we break the barriers of this is not the devil, right? So it may still take a couple of years to get there, but certainly Mexico is going that direction. You know, in Germany, the new government has already stated that they were looking for legalization of adult use. And I think the more all these governments learn on the mistakes and the good things that have been done by other countries like Canada, we may be able to come up with a framework where both industries can coexist. One adult use and the other one in short, medical purposes, like they do in Germany. And no, then both worlds will coexist. 5 years from now, I would say that once people start breaking those barriers, there should not be any issue of legalizing adult use in countries like this. But we have to take it one step at a time. In the meantime, we'll just keep building our market leadership position in the cannabis industry. And whenever that happens, then we'll figure out how to get ready for it.
Yep, that makes sense. And so I'm curious, have you looked into selling into Canada at all, or is that just not an attractive market?
No, I mean, Canada is an attractive market always. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars a month on sales. I mean, for us, there's restrictions on the exports that we can do to Canada, right? So that's not something that right now any Colombian company has been able to do. What we are thinking really about is how do we add a lot more data to our database of patients and outcomes on medical cannabis, because what I do believe is that all this data and evidence that we're collecting, that we could collect on a more international level, will allow us to develop a pipeline of products that will eventually be on this pharmaceutical grade type of grade, which is also the next holy grail to be able to enter the United States with FDA type approved products.
Yeah.
We already have a clinic in the UK. When you start collecting information from patients in Mexico, in Brazil, in Peru, in UK, then you are able to develop what type of next products we should do. So the appeal of Canada is that there's a very big market for medical cannabis, that there's patients there, that there's registered patients. I mean, right now it's not something we're necessarily looking at, but it is always an obsession of ours. How do we add more data so that we can monetize it down the road?
And so as a legal medical company in Colombia, are you able to sell adult use cannabis to other countries?
No, so Colombia only allows the export of either finished product, extracts, or dry flower recently, only for medical purposes. Now, as I told you, we only export medical cannabis within Latin America. Our go-to-market strategy, supply chain strategy in Europe is actually to produce within Europe. And that's not because Colombia cannot provide low-cost advantage, because right now we value a lot the agility and the efficiency of being able to supply within the same continent. So that you can service the UK market. If there's an uptick in demand, you can service it in 3 days, right? Eventually, the world will allow for more global exports, and we will try to take advantage of that as well. But we're also in the business of building demand. And so we take a different supply chain approach, but it's only medical. I mean, what people can do out of Colombia.
That makes sense. And so where are you growing in Europe?
Well, we don't grow it ourselves. We have third-party partners that grow in the Iberian Peninsula, in Portugal and Spain. What we did is we exported our strains from Colombia long time ago. We shipped them to Europe. We took those varieties, we grow them, and that's how we sort of look at the same type of product in each different continent. I mean, what happened back then is that we wanted to enter Europe. We know one thing this company really knows how to do is how to convince doctors to prescribe cannabis. So if we could take our data, which is more valuable than our cultivation, we can take our data and educate doctors on it. Why do we then work backwards? Colombia wasn't allowed the export of flower, and we find the right partners that want to produce what we need at the right quality with all these EU GMP certificates and all of that. And that's how we got to the European market faster than anybody from LATAM. I mean, and if you look at what's happening right now in this Q1 and onwards, Europe is now representing half of our cannabis revenues. And it's not because we're really good at exporting flower, it's because we are really good at convincing doctors of medical cannabis, and we're really good at knowing what type of quality and products we can supply to our patients.
Yeah. That's great. And so What are some of the most effective techniques you found for convincing doctors? And have you put together maybe any any resources that interested folks could download from your website or anything like that?
Yeah, so we set up our own academy. It's called Khiron Academy. We've been in Latin America. We partner with the Tech of Monterrey, which is Mexico's top university, and that carries a lot of weight. In the UK, we partner with the MCCS to have accredited courses on medical cannabis. But I think the one unique thing that we've been doing is that because we have not just the theory, but the practical expertise of prescribing cannabis, we also invite doctors, either online or personally, to come and see how we do this live. And if we were here right now, Jordan, if I was taking the call in our clinics, there would be 2 out of 3 patients living every day with a cannabis prescription, 650 people a day. When you see that level of evidence, you talk to patients, you talk to doctors, and you're able to experience online or live that level of expertise, and you can talk to 45 different doctors of different specialties that treat fibromyalgia, chronic pain, sleep disorders, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, and you can see that empirical evidence at play. I think that's what changes doctors' perceptions on cannabis, because of course anybody can do theoretical exercises, and plenty of companies have a myth and reality of cannabis. But when you come to Khiron and you're working with us, or you want to be trained with us, you're going to be able to experience all that evidence live or online. Now, what we did this week, we announced that we did our first real publication, which also starts bringing a level of seriousness of how we compile the data, and you start breaking those barriers. And that is, I think, what's very unique about us, because even a doctor in the UK right now, like the ones we have, has the ability to talk to 70, 80 professionals across Latin America who are experts at prescribing medical cannabis. Mm-hmm. And that expertise brings more expertise and just keeps driving it more and more. So to summarize, I think it's not just the theory that we have, the compilation of the data, but the ability that we have to show. You want to talk to our patients, talk to them, ask them the question. You want to talk to the doctors. And I think that's really what makes the Khiron approach very unique. It's something you can see, something you can touch, something you can talk to patients and doctors about, and it's not just an online text.
That makes total sense. And I can imagine that database you're putting together is also really valuable for helping them understand, what's necessarily what has efficacy for certain ailments. And so on that point, we'd be curious, what are some of the things that you're tracking? Is it cannabinoid profile? Is it specific strains relative to patient demographics and what specific illnesses they have? Or could you just dive in a little bit further there?
Oh, we measure everything. But I will start that we start with a very basic portfolio, Jordan, of oil-based tinctures in LATAM, high THC, high CBD, 1-to-1 in different combinations. So it's 5 products of sublingual oils. We wanted to make that as simpler as possible, because as we say, if we cannot sell the iPhone 1 well, we're never going to get to the iPhone 10. But then we start measuring demographics, age groups, sex, type of conditions and sub-conditions. We treat 49 different sub-conditions, from ghost member lesion to refractory epilepsy on children. We even look at dosages. We look at titration. We look at ability of payment and family environment to see what are the factors that make a patient feel better or not. Of course, we track side effects for each one of the products. We also track side effects over time, because you have to, in some cases, your cannabinoid system has not been activated. So the conversation of how fast something should work is a very important one as well, because in some cases, you don't feel better right away. It's a whole process. And now we also measure the effect of cannabis versus reduction of other types of medication like opiates, right? And so if you think about 30,000 patients that are in your system, there's a lot of data points that we are able to collect so that we can see what works better, what type of new products we should come up with, what are the side effects some people feel, How can we reduce impact of other medications? And now what we're also doing is how can we complement cannabis with other types of treatments and services to improve the overall quality of life of the patient. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, Jordan, when you're talking about chronic pain, which is almost incurable, chronic pain you have to treat. It's very difficult to get rid of it. Mm-hmm. So what you're trying to do is improve the quality of life. That doesn't necessarily mean medication. It means in some cases, for example, we work with psychology and psychiatry. How do you manage pain from your own mind if you're taking yourself off opiates? And all of this information we're able to treat because for us, the patient is at the center. And some cases cannabis works, in some more cases it doesn't. Sometimes when you're talking about a chronic pain patient, you're not trying to reduce their pain, you're trying to reduce their way that they can deal with it. So those type of things we measure, and that's the entire portfolio of evidence that we're building so that we can keep doing publications.
Got it. That makes total sense. And it's certainly very important industry need. And I imagine it's similar environment country by country in Latin and Europe as it is in the US, state by state, where you just have all these supply chains that are at different levels of maturity. Products are different state to state. There's just really no consistency for the end customer. And, frankly, I think a lot of medical only states almost become de facto like workarounds for adult use. But then at the end of the day, for the people who really need this for medicinal purposes, they don't necessarily have the right resources or consistency of product to know what specific things they should be using.
Yes, and I think that you make a very excellent point in terms of the consistency of product, right? One of the key things that we do, and that's why we limited our portfolio for now to things that we can replicate easier and easier, is that we're building a database, at least within LATAM, of the same product in different countries. And that is what's going to create, a pharmaceutical pipeline down the line. Because the problem with some of these studies, when you do cannabis, and what you've probably seen, there's very rarely consistency of product when people are compiling all this data, even when you talk about dry flower, right? That you have the terpene, entourage effect, things like that. So we try to come back to the basics and then see if we can come up with a very standardized product, 3-year shelf stability. How do patients behave? And that's what's more valuable about the data that we're collecting. And that allows us to convince doctors, not on cannabis, right? On Khiron's products as well. And that's what builds a brand with the patients and the doctors.
Gotcha. That's really helpful.
Yeah.
And so are there anything that, any requests you have of our listeners? Are you looking to hire any positions? Are you looking for investors or anything like that?
Well, I think, of course, for us, it's always about, more investor awareness. And I think, everybody always talks about cannabis, and we always separate MSOs, Canadians, everybody with their own challenges, their own successes. I think my point also is like, besides North America, there's a bigger world out there, at least in the Western Hemisphere, right? We're talking about a population of almost 1.5 billion people that have the same needs as in the United States and Canada. Right now, international markets like Latin America and Europe are where Florida was 6 years ago. And if you can think about that, cannabis is not a fad, it's not a trend, this is here to stay. And those companies that enjoy that first mover advantage and are really consumer centric are the ones that are going to be leading a market that's going to be bigger than Canada on its own. And sometimes we have to think a little bit ahead of that, but imagine me, I started this company in Colombia. Even today, we're looked at as a Colombian company, but the way I look at it, we're probably going to be selling more in Europe than we do in Colombia. I'm going to stay in Colombia because of the weather. But besides that, the world of international medical cannabis is a very big one. And the opportunities right now, because we are where the United States was 6 years ago. And 6 years from now, we'll be talking about Germany and UK and Spain and France and Brazil. And we're going to look at it as established markets, but somebody had to build them. Yeah. And I think we try to make sure that investors and shareholders understand that what's happening internationally in terms of the evidence is probably much higher than what's happening even in North America. And one day the world will think about consolidation. I don't know if it's today, but it's going to be with companies that can be leaders in their respective markets.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Alvaro, congrats on being in a market so early. And to your point, just so much tremendous upside across LATAM and Europe. So really excited that you joined the podcast today and looking forward to staying in touch and seeing how the business continues to grow here in the future.
Thank you, Jordan. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you. And anytime, I'm more than happy to talk to you again.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.